The night my uncle clinked his glass and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, so she's still doing the massage thing, I was sitting near the folding table by the coat closet. Not literally a folding table, but close enough. It was a round 6-seater pushed against the wall of my aunt and uncle's dining room. The one they bring out when the guest list runs long and the good chairs are already spoken for. My place card, if you could call it that, it was a sticky note with my name in my aunt's handwriting, was wedged between a stack of extra napkins and an unopened bottle of sparkling water no one had claimed. I had known about the seating a week before the dinner. My cousin had let it slip on the phone, not unkindly, just in the way she lets things slip when she thinks I already know. Mom's putting you and your boyfriend near the window end, she'd said. You know how she gets about the main table being for the Gagnon side. I knew how she got, I'd known for most of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Gagnon family runs a legal practice out of Gatineau. My grandfather started it in 1978, one office above a pharmacy on St. Joseph Boulevard, a second-hand desk and a reputation built entirely on showing up. My uncle expanded it into Gagnon and Associates, 3 partners, 12 staff, a glass-fronted suite near the river, and a name that gets mentioned whenever someone in the area needs a real estate deal handled right. My aunt has been their office manager and unofficial social director for 22 years. Their son, my cousin Etienne, passed the bar 2 years ago and already has his name on the letterhead. There is a framed photo wall in the practice's waiting room. I know because I've been there. My grandfather in his early headshot, tie slightly crooked. My uncle at the opening of the new office. Etienne at his call to the bar, flanked by both parents, everyone beaming. I looked at that wall once and counted the people in it. I'm not there. Not because I haven't done anything worth photographing, but because 8 years ago, when I told my family I wanted to study social work instead of law or accounting, my aunt set down her coffee cup in a very deliberate way and said, "Noemi, what does that even lead to?" And my uncle nodded like the question had answered itself. My mother, my aunt's younger sister, stayed quiet. She's always stayed quiet around them. It's easier. She told me later that night that she was sure it would work out, that she was proud of me, that families sometimes need time to adjust. That was 8 years ago. We're still adjusting, apparently. I work as a child and youth mental health counselor at a community services center in Ottawa. My caseload includes kids in foster care, teenagers who've aged out of the system and have nowhere to go, and families navigating chaos involvement for the first time, terrified and defensive and in over their heads. I make $58,000 a year. I have a master's degree I paid for mostly through OSAP and a bursary from my placement agency. I work 45 hours most weeks and think about my clients on the commute home more often than I probably should. My aunt calls it my volunteer work. Not always. Sometimes she just calls it the counseling thing, the same way you'd say the pottery class or the phase she went through. My uncle's version is slightly more generous. He calls it meaningful. He says it with a small pause before the word, the kind of pause that does more damage than anything that follows. The moment I stopped waiting for things to shift came about 10 months ago. Our center was awarded a provincial recognition for innovation in youth outreach, a formal grant acknowledgement from the Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services, given to one organization per region, per year. I had written the proposal, I had coordinated the pilot program they cited in the award language. I sent the date to the family group chat 3 weeks out. My uncle responded that evening. He said he had a client dinner he couldn't move. He said, "You understand how these things stack up." He included a thumbs-up emoji, which I think was meant to soften it. The following Saturday, he drove 4 hours to watch Etienne argue a moot at a continuing legal education event. I saw the photo on Facebook. He had his arm around Etienne and the expression he gets when he's genuinely proud. Jaw loose, eyes soft, leaning in like he wants to be close to whatever's good. I kept the award letter on my kitchen table for 2 weeks. Then I moved it to the recycling pile by accident and didn't notice for 3 days. That bothered me more than losing the letter itself. So when people ask why I never talked much about Finn to my extended family, why I kept him separate from that world for as long as I did, the answer is simple. They never asked. They knew I was seeing someone. My aunt's complete inquiry, delivered over the phone in October, was, "Is he in a profession?" "He builds furniture. He has a workshop in Renfrew County." A pause. "Custom furniture?" "He restores antique pieces and builds originals. He sells through 2 galleries in the Glebe and 1 in Westboro. His work has been in 2 editorial spreads in Canadian House and Home." Another pause, longer. "Well, I suppose there's a market for handmade things." And that was the entire conversation. 14 months of my life, one of the most grounding relationships I'd ever had, reduced to a shrug and a qualifier about market conditions. Finn Ibarra builds furniture the way some people read. Constantly. Deliberately, like it's the thing that makes the rest of life make sense. He grew up splitting time between his father's workshop in Renfrew and his mother's kitchen in Brampton, and he has the kind of patience that doesn't perform itself. He drives a white transit van with sawdust on the floor mats and a thermos that's been the same thermos for 6 years. He is not flashy in any direction. When I met him at a maker's market on Bank Street, I had stopped to look at a side table he built from reclaimed elm. I asked him where the wood came from. He told me the whole story: a barn outside Perth that had been demolished, the farmer who'd saved the beams, how long it had taken to dry properly. He asked what I did. I told him. He asked what I did. I told him. He asked what part of the work I found hardest. Not whether it paid well. Not whether I was going to do it long term. What I found hardest. I told him about a 16-year-old I'd been working with that month, a kid who'd been in 6 placements in 3 years and had gotten very good at making himself easy to leave. How the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the system. It was learning to stay present with someone who was constantly testing whether you'd disappear. Finn listened the way people do when they're actually tracking what you're saying, not waiting for a gap to speak into. He was not, however, exactly what he appeared. There were small things I filed and didn't quite examine. A phone call he took outside once, speaking with a precision and formality that didn't match a conversation about lumber. A set of documents on his kitchen counter, he'd left them there when he stepped away to get water. Dense with legal language, something about a property trust and a conservation easement. A mention in passing of a meeting with someone from Heritage Canada he described as just paperwork and then moved on from quickly. I asked once. He said it was an old project, nothing interesting, family land stuff. I let it go. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I had learned by then that Finn tells you what you need to know when it becomes relevant. And the relevant things, how he listened, how he showed up, how he made me feel like my work mattered and my instincts were worth trusting, none of that was in question. My cousin Etienne's engagement party was held at my aunt and uncle's property in Chelsea, Quebec. They have a large house on a wooded lot about 20 minutes from the Gatineau Park entrance, with a covered terrace that fits 40 people and a backyard that had been decorated for the occasion, with white string lights and rented bistro chairs. Catered by a company from Hull. A jazz trio in the corner. 2 long tables on the terrace with real linens and engraved name cards, and a 3rd table set off to the side, technically still on the terrace, but near the door to the mudroom and close enough to the buffet station that the staff moved around us all night. Etienne was marrying Claudine Owele, a corporate lawyer from Quebec City with sharp posture and a dry sense of humor I'd always liked. Her father, Remy Owele, had served 2 terms as a municipal councillor in Quebec City before moving into private arbitration. He was the most prominent guest at the party, and he'd driven up from the city that morning. Finn and I arrived together. He wore a dark jacket over a white shirt, no tie. I wore a green dress I'd chosen myself, not the cream-colored thing my aunt had texted a link to with the note, "This might be more your event aesthetic." My uncle greeted us at the door. He shook Finn's hand the way you shake a hand when you've already decided it doesn't need a firm grip. My aunt told me I looked sweet and steered us both toward the side table before we'd been inside 2 minutes. I had found out about the seating on my own, through the guest list my mother had forwarded me by mistake. She'd meant to send it to my aunt to confirm dietary needs. My name was listed under additional guests, side table, alongside 2 of Etienne's university friends and a second cousin who was 7. Claudine's parents were at the main table with my uncle and aunt and the 4 senior partners my uncle had invited. I didn't react when I saw it. I'd spent years building a tolerance for exactly this. Smaller versions of it had been arriving for so long that I'd almost stopped registering them as events. But seeing it in a spreadsheet, in my aunt's careful formatting under that column header, additional guests, made something settle in a way it hadn't before. Not anger. More like the last piece of something clicking into place. I told Finn the night I saw the list. We were at his place in Renfrew, sitting at the kitchen table he'd built himself. White ash, beveled edges, a surface so smooth it felt like it had always existed. "Do you want to skip it?" he said. I thought about it. "No," I said, "I want to go. I need to see it clearly one more time, and then I'm done, letting it be unclear." He looked at me for a moment. "Okay," he said, "I'll be there." The side table was exactly as described. Door to the mudroom on our left, buffet warming trays on our right. The jazz trio just far enough away that the music reached us a half beat later than it reached the main terrace. The name cards were printed on plain cardstock. The main table had cards printed on heavy cream stock, with a sprig of dried lavender tucked into each one. Remy Owele sat between my uncle and aunt, relaxed and pleasant, the particular ease of someone who is accustomed to being the room's most interesting variable. He glanced over at our table twice in the first 15 minutes. Both times his eyes passed over Finn and moved on. The third time, they stopped. I watched something move across his face, a stillness, a recalibration. He looked at Finn the way you look at someone when you're trying to match a face to a context and the context keeps shifting. The toast came from my uncle. He stood at the head of the main table, glass raised, and did what he did better than almost anything else. Held a room by making people feel grateful to be held by it. He spoke about legacy, about what it meant to build something lasting, about Etienne with the specific warmth of a man who had been paying close attention for 30 years. "He has never done anything halfway," my uncle said, and the terrace murmured with recognition. Then his gaze moved to me. Deliberate, measured, the way you look at something you've already decided how to handle. "My niece, Noemi," he said, warm, indulgent, careful, chose a different kind of work. She's in social services, counseling of some kind. It's very good work in its way. He let that land. Then, and she's brought her friend along. He works with wood, is that right? Something handmade. A small smile at the main table. He looked at me directly. Very artisanal, Noemi. There were maybe 45 people on that terrace. At least 30 of them looked at me. I put a piece of food in my mouth and chewed it. I did not answer. Finn set down his fork and stood up. The terrace registered it the way a room registers a sudden shift in pressure. Not loud, just present. Remy Owele rose from the main table at almost the same moment. He crossed the terrace with a directness that made everyone watch, the evening's most distinguished guest walking toward the side table with an expression that did not match the pleasantness of the last 2 hours. "Finn," he said, stopping at our table. Quiet. The jazz trio had paused between songs. Finn looked up. "Remy, I didn't know you'd be here." My uncle was standing. "You two know each other?" Remy looked at my uncle with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone deciding how much patience they have left for the question. "Know him." He said it flatly. Then, "This is Finn Ibarra. He owns the Ibarra Sinclair Land Trust, one of the largest private conservation holdings in eastern Ontario. 12,000 acres across Renfrew and Lanark counties. He's been working with the Federal Heritage Office on a protected area designation for the Madawaska Corridor for 3 years. He paused. I sat across from him at a meeting with the Minister of Natural Resources 18 months ago. He turned down a consulting contract with our arbitration panel because he said he doesn't do rooms, he does land. A beat? He also, Remy said, glancing at me, funds the Rural Mental Health Satellite Program through the Renfrew County Community Foundation, the one that's keeping 3 youth counseling positions alive in communities that the province stopped funding 2 years ago. He looked at me steadily. I imagine you know more about that side of things than I do. My uncle opened his mouth. Nothing came out right away. Finn spoke to the terrace without raising his voice. I didn't come tonight to make a point, he said. I came because Noemi asked me to and because she is the most clear-eyed person I know. She works with kids who have no floor under them. Kids who are waiting to see if the next adult in their life will also leave. She builds trust with people who have every reason not to trust anyone, and she does it week after week, without recognition, without anyone in this family ever once asking her what her work actually involves. He looked at my uncle. You've known me by first name only for 14 months. That's not an accident of memory. That's what happens when you've already decided what something is worth. He sat back down. The terrace was quiet in the way that outdoor spaces are rarely quiet. I stood up. My voice was steadier than my hands. You've been telling me what my work is worth for 8 years, I said, looking at my aunt and uncle both. Not always out loud. But every time you called it the counseling thing, every time you introduced Etienne and then added me like a footnote you weren't sure was necessary, every time you put me at the additional guests table while the partners sit with the linen and the lavender. My aunt looked at the tablecloth. I'm not angry. I've been angry. Right now I'm just done. Done reshaping myself to fit the space you leave for me. I looked at Finn. We're leaving. We walked off the terrace. No one stopped us. The jazz trio started playing again before we reached the car. My cousin Claudine called 4 days later. She was the one I hadn't expected. Her voice was composed in the careful way of someone who has been a lawyer long enough to know when composure is a choice rather than a feeling. My father spoke to your uncle the morning after, she said. He withdrew from 2 professional associations your uncle sits on. He sent a letter. I don't know all of what it said, but I know the word judgment was in it. I didn't say anything. 2 of your uncle's referral partners sent letters within the week, she continued. One of them cited a concern about professional culture. The retainer they represented is significant. A pause. My father also called the chair of a provincial land use committee your uncle had been recommended for. He asked that his recommendation be withdrawn. Claudine was quiet for a moment. I want you to know that I knew what they were doing with the seating. I saw the list. I didn't say anything because it's always been easier not to. Another pause. That was wrong. My mother called the day after. She had stayed at the party, which I'd expected, and she had watched the whole thing happen, which she told me without prompting. I should have said something long before this, she said. And then she just stayed on the line, not filling the space. Just staying in it. That was new. My uncle called at the end of the week. He did not open with an apology. He opened with, there are some things I'd like to clear up. I told him I would meet with him and my aunt, once with a counselor present. Not because I was optimistic, but because I had spent 8 years asking for clarity and I wanted to have asked for it properly at least once. He agreed. My aunt agreed. The meeting was hard in the way that things are hard when the language available to people is smaller than what they're trying to say. We've had 3 sessions now. In the first one, my aunt said something I didn't expect. She said, I didn't understand what you did, and instead of asking, I decided I already knew. It cost her something to say that. I heard it in the silence before she said it. I'm not sure yet what that costs me to receive. I don't know where this goes. I've stopped needing to know right this minute. What I know is that I drove home after the first session and sat in my car in the parking lot of my building for a while before going in. And the thing in my chest wasn't relief or vindication. It was something quieter, like a window opened in a room that had been sealed for a long time and the air wasn't warm yet, but it was moving. Finn was at his kitchen table when I got to his place that evening, working through a sketchbook of plans for a commission. He looked up. I sat down across from him. "I think I'm okay," I said. He nodded once, like that was the only answer he'd been waiting to hear. "There's something I keep coming back to." My family sized Finn up by the surface. The van, the workshop, the first name without a title attached, and found him easy to dismiss. He was running a conservation trust that has protected more land in this province than most NGOs manage in a decade, and funding mental health services in communities nobody else was looking at, and none of it showed on the outside because he never needed it to. He just did the work. I think about how much of myself I spent across those years trying to make what I do legible to people who had already filed it under not serious. The clients I couldn't talk about. The outcomes I couldn't measure in billable hours. The progress that looks, from the outside, like nothing. Until a kid who stopped talking to adults starts talking again. So let me ask you something. Is there someone in your life you've written off before you knew the whole of it? Someone whose work you've summarized in one word because the real answer was harder to hold? I've been that person in a room for a long time. I don't think I'm alone in that. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night on the terrace in Chelsea. Not the dramatic part, not Finn standing up or Remy crossing the room. The part that came before all of it. The part that was just me, sitting at a table near the mudroom door, cutting my food into smaller pieces and deciding to stay in my seat. That decision cost something. Staying in a room where you know you've been filed under not serious costs, something every single time. What I've come to understand is that the cost isn't weakness. It's actually a kind of intelligence. You don't walk away from the people you love without first being certain you've seen them clearly. I needed to see it one more time without the soft focus I'd been applying for years. And I did. What happened to my uncle afterward wasn't luck, and it wasn't punishment handed down by anything outside of ordinary human cause and effect. Remy Oyele withdrew because a man of his judgment couldn't overlook what he'd witnessed and still feel good about his professional associations. The referral partners sent letters because when someone reveals their values that plainly, in public, the people around them have to decide what they're willing to stand next to. These are just consequences. Every choice has weight. My uncle had been making the same choice for 8 years. To measure people by credentials and surface, and the weight of it finally landed somewhere he could feel it. What struck me most about Finn, through all of it, was that he never needed anyone in that room to understand him. He had done meaningful work for years without anyone at my family's table knowing his last name, and that hadn't slowed him down by a single day. That's a kind of strength I'm still learning. There's a version of strength that announces itself, that needs the room to register it. And then there's the version that just keeps showing up. To the land, to the work, to the people who need it, without waiting for the acknowledgement to arrive first. Finn has the second kind. I think that's actually the harder one to build. I've been sitting with the question of what I want to carry out of this, not from the party itself, but from the whole 8 years that led to it. I spent a long time trying to make my work legible to people who had already decided what it was worth. I translated it into language they might respect. I showed up to dinners and shrunk myself into the version of me that would cause the least friction. That's not nothing. There's a kind of endurance in it, a willingness to stay in relation to people even when it costs you. But there's a point where endurance tips into erasure, and I had reached it without noticing. What I know now is that the clearest thing I did in all of this was refuse to perform being fine when I wasn't, and refuse to leave without having said something true. Not to win, not to be validated, just because it was true and I was done swallowing it. My aunt said in a first session that she hadn't understood what I did, and instead of asking, she decided she already knew. It's such a small failure, described plainly like that, and it caused so much. Most of the damage in ordinary life isn't cruelty, it's in curiosity. It's the assumption that what we can see on the surface is the whole of it. I think about my clients when I think about that. The kids I work with who have been summed up by every adult who is too tired or too certain to look closer. The ones who need someone to stay curious about them past the first difficult impression. That's the entire job, really. Staying curious, refusing to close the file. I don't know yet what my family becomes. I'm in the room. That's what I can say.